Matters talk. I like to think of this as our spring series. I'm feeling like spring is just around the corner, and this is one of 6 Wellness Matters talks that we still have coming up before the end of the year. Today's talk is with Julie Ketel, and the topic is nurturing resiliency through creative expression. Julie's talk will be about 45 minutes or so, and then following her talk, we'll have some time for questions. My name is Nicole Imgrund, and I am the owner and director of River's Edge Counseling Center. And I will be here just monitoring the chat and also helping to moderate the Q&A at the end as well. A little bit about our presenter today. Julie is one of the practicum students at River's Edge Counseling Center, spending a year with us, helping to serve our clients. And she has been a wonderful, lovely addition to our team. We've been really fortunate to have her. Julie is just completing the Master of Counseling program at Athabasca with a specialization in art therapy. Prior to her training in this work, Julie worked as a coach with children in elementary schools, helping them to develop coping strategies. And she says that some of the most meaningful experience in the field that she has had to date is actually her volunteer work with the Zebra Child Protection Center. Julie's interest in art therapy and in the topic tonight truly comes out of her own passion for using art for her own wellness and creative expression. And with that, Julie, I'm going to turn it over to you and let you screen share.
Thank you, Nicole.
Thank you.
All right, let's get this presentation up here. Here we go. Okay. I just wanted to, first of all, thank everybody who is attending today. I feel so honored to be able to share what I have learned about art and resiliency. And I truly hope that by the end of this presentation that you'll learn at least one new thing about resilience and art, and perhaps maybe some new tools that you can incorporate into your own practice or develop an entirely new practice. All right, so I wanted to first share with you why I chose this topic for this talk. And I think the short answer is COVID. And I think the long answer is that I really feel passionate that we need to find different ways to cope with the world around us. Because what is very clear is that we are all in this shared experience together. It looks a little bit different. It feels a little bit different. But we do have this element of shared suffering. So whether we are coping with isolation and loneliness, a lack of control and freedom, grief and loss, stress or anxiety, or illness and disease, these are all really big and heavy things to tackle. And some of the research that has come up with regard to COVID tells us a lot about how we are feeling, but also how we are coping. So I've been following the Canadian Centre for Addictions and Mental Health. They've been doing lots of research with regard to the mental health of Canadians in COVID. They've been doing national studies and canvassing Canadians all across the country. Some of the things that they've discovered is that at least 50% of respondents felt that they were at least a little bit lonely within a 7-day period. 80% were somewhat to very worried that someone close to them would get COVID or ill. And 64% felt nervous, anxious, or on edge for at least several days. So how are we coping? We are finding whatever coping strategies are working for us in the moment. This particular study found that nearly a quarter of respondents were engaging in heavily episodic drinking. So the CAMH focuses on substance abuse. So most of the research pertained to the consumption of substances like alcohol and cannabis. However, I think it's also important to note that there are also other coping strategies that Canadians are using that aren't maybe working particularly well. I'm thinking of TV or social media or even, video games, and overindulging in really rich food filled with sugar and filled with fat, things that make us feel really good in the short term, but might not be able to help us effectively cope in the long term. So I think it's important to also recognize that alcohol is a depressant and that there's lots of research that limits or that relates significant screen time and poor nutrition to depression and to poor mental resiliency. So I chose this topic because I really feel strongly that Canadians need more options for how to cope with COVID, and for how to cope with what's going on in the world around them, but also what's going on for them at an individual and family level. So what I noticed in the research is that there are many different definitions for resilience. For the purpose of the presentation today, I'm going to use the definition from Linda Graham. She's a licensed marriage and family therapist for over 26 years, and she's written lots of literature, very practical resources on resilience. And so her definition includes a couple of very main elements. And the first one is my favorite. So, how you respond to the issue is the issue. And so, some of the other elements that are involved within her definition of resilience is this need for an attitude and behavior shift. And we do this by refocusing our attention from what is happening around us or what has just happened or what will happen to coping with what has happened or what will happen. So it's a bit of a refocus. She talks about how there is this beautiful space between a stimulus and our response. So it's within that space from the event and our response lies our growth and our freedom. So this shift that we make shifts us from a poor me victim mentality to a very empowered, active, I can do this stance. And so strengthening resilience and resiliency comes from seeing ourselves as people who can be resilient, who are competent at coping, and who are competent at learning how to cope for ourselves. All right, so why should we cope using creativity and art when there are so many options available to us? Why art? A lot of the evidence that I found is rooted in two main camps, and I'm going to briefly go through them with you today. The first is Indigenous and contemporary culture, and the second is Western neuroscience. So starting with culture, I wanted to provide a glimpse into some of the frameworks in terms of art and healing. So here we have three different models intersecting together. The ones on the bottom are traditional frameworks or traditional models for healing. The one on the left, creative arts as healing, basically means that the actual process of creating art or creativity is healing in its innate nature. The one on the right, the creative arts in therapy, is basically meaning that when we engage in therapeutic practice, that arts can easily be incorporated and you can find healing in that sense. The third ring, the one at the top, is one that was created by the Aboriginal Healing Foundation. So they felt that those two rings on the bottom were not sufficient to be able to reflect the models of healing that are also held by Indigenous peoples. So the one on the top, the holistic healing, includes creative arts, really reflects that Aboriginal people feel that healing transcends all the other models because it also includes creative arts, culture, and spirituality within its definition. They also believe that all of the models intersect because a really effective healing program involves elements with two or more of these rings. and that the overlap is dynamic, and that the primary benefits of one model can support movement into other areas of the model. So the model that we're going to focus mostly on in our talk today is the one on the bottom left. So the creative arts as healing. So it's very important to note that we're not talking about art therapy within the context of this presentation. This is more practical things that you can do home and incorporate into your own routines and practices. But I will spend a little bit of time at the end giving you just a brief introduction to art therapy for anybody who's interested. All right, so if we dig a little bit deeper into this Indigenous perspective of art and healing, one of the consultants that worked with the Aboriginal Healing Foundation, her name is Anna Bodnar, and her perspective is really that art making has a lot of similarities with the medicine wheel. So each direction of the wheel is grounded in a very essential aspect of our making. So the physical aspect helps people be grounded and be in the present moment. So that's a very mindfulness stance. Emotional helps people to express and externalize emotion, release tension, release stress. From a spiritual perspective, it helps to reconnect with spirit. And from a mental perspective, it helps to organize and create perspective. So I wanted to share with you a couple of different examples of art and culture that pertain to healing. The first one is Navajo sand painting. So this particular sand painting piece was created by Ernest and Wayne Hunt. And the story behind sand painting is that traditional or Indigenous healers would draw upon a vast body of symbolism, and they would pass this down from century to century. Often these symbolic images were held in their memory, and they would pass them down to new generations. The effectiveness of using the cultural symbols as expressed by the medicine men during the sand painting ceremony is that the presentation of origin myths, whether it's in song or prayer or sand painting, allows the patient to identify with the symbolic forces that once created the world. And by entering them, it recreated himself or herself in a state of health and wholeness. So as you notice that the pattern of the sand painting is very similar to a mandala, as you would see in Tibetan art or Tibetan healing. A lot of tribes also compare this mandala shape to the shape of the medicine wheel, which has been used by Indigenous tribes for thousands of years. So similar to the medicine wheel, as we looked in the previous slide, sand paintings are also oriented in 4 different directions. And they bring into relationship the powers that are ruling those directions around the center of the mandala. So both Tibetan and Navajo sand paintings are destroyed and remade every time that the ceremony is given to the person that needs to be healed. So they're very temporary, and they're also very transformative. So the whole purpose of the ceremony is for transformations to occur within the participants, within the people needing to be healed. And I included a picture of the back of this piece of art because I thought it was so beautiful. These artists really describe the different symbolic elements, what they represent, and how they help the intended person. So things such as, they talk about the rainbow around the painting is protection for the sand painting. And at the very last line, I really love how they talk about how they're using all natural, colorful rocks ground down into fine sand to create this piece of art. All right, this next image comes from an exhibition titled Dancing Spirit in Isolation, which is currently being exhibited in the Moose Jaw Museum and Art Gallery. So this exhibition showcases the works of 30 Indigenous women. And it is known to be a healing project, and it was inspired during the early days of COVID-19. There was a request to be able to capitalize or to use ancestral practice within the city of Moose Jaw on a more regular basis. And so the significance of that time in which COVID started to get really bad is that this was also a period, when winter turns into spring, that was traditional as a time when individual cultural projects were completed. And therefore, because everyone was in isolation, it seemed like a natural time for this project to start. So the structure of this particular exhibition is they had a teen artist commission and design a template depicting a jingle dress dancer. So as the jingle dress dance is a healing dance, each participant, each artist that was involved in this project had their own interpretation through beading. And so women would bring their own meaning into their piece with the intention to show that how their spirit danced in isolation, which was really beautiful. So I think that this is a lovely example of how Indigenous healing practices, specifically beadwork, has survived and evolved and thrived within a contemporary landscape. All right, so this artist is a little bit more personal and close to my heart. I wanted to share with you my most visceral experience with art and mental health. So back in 2014, I visited the art gallery DC3, which is in Edmonton, and I was able to interact with this artist's work. This is the work of Richard Goulet. DC3 is renowned for showcasing very edgy and challenging and engaging bodies of work from artists. And I think Richard Goulet fits that example to a T. So Richard's artwork is very, very highly personal, and it draws upon his experience with schizophrenia and other broader mental health disorders. So I first saw his artworks when I was dealing with my own grief and loss. And I remember how surprised I was in the emotional reaction I had to viewing his work. So it was almost as if the pain in me recognized the pain translated through his art. And I'm very aware that, our pain is not the same, our experiences are not the same, but it was a really tender experience because I really felt this sense of shared experience. And one of the first pieces of art I ever bought for myself was one of his pieces. Not the one that's on the screen right now, but it was a different piece. Okay, so going into that second element, that second piece of evidence that supports art and healing is Western neuroscience. So there's a lot of evidence that supports the relationship between art and well-being. And there are two especially fascinating findings within the literature that I wanted to share with you. And the first one is that you don't have to be a creator to find benefit through art. So simply appreciating or visually taking in art can have a positive health effect on a viewer. The second piece of evidence that I thought was really interesting is the fact that you don't have to be an experienced artist to yield any of the benefits either. So no matter what skill level you're at, you can use art to cope with what's going on in your life. And I think that this also applies to the complexity of the art activity too. So even something just as simple as mindful coloring can activate the reward pathways in our brains. So in addition to that, there's also evidence that art making can help us navigate problems that arise in the future. It can help to reduce distress, increase self-reflection and self-awareness. It can alter behavior and thinking patterns. And even from a body perspective, it can normalize heart rate, blood pressure, and cortisol levels, which is our stress hormone. All right, so we're moving to my most favorite part of the presentation. This is more of these practical pieces that you can build into your own practice. One of the art therapists that I've used quite often and that I've used to even build this presentation, she always has a pre or post practice ritual. And so I wanted to share that concept with you because I think it's something really easy that you could translate to your own practice. So her rituals always start with some sort of grounding exercise before she begins making art. So grounding might look for different based on the person. It could be something really as simple as taking some really deep belly breaths, closing your eyes, taking a moment to put your feet on the floor and really ground into your space. And then the next phase really focuses on turning inward. So noticing where you are in that moment. What sort of sensations, images, feelings, or thoughts come up for you? So really allow yourself to explore the detail of what surfaces in this moment. So for example, if you're feeling a sensation in your body, what is the quality of the sensation? Where do you notice it in your body? How intense is it? Does it have a temperature? Is it hot or cold or neutral? And what does the sensation feel like? Is it static? Is it pulsating or undulating? Really kind of focus on what the details are. So after you've done your pre-practice, you can engage in your art practice. And then there is an encouragement to have a post-practice. So really sort of close out your practice in a really mindful way. And the art therapist that I refer to, she really likes to use mindful writing. And sometimes she even provides some reflective questions so that you can use, you don't have to think of them on your own. So some of the questions that she might suggest is, if you take a minute to look at the image, what do you see in the image? So write in a very objective way, simply describing what the image looks like without interpreting or without any judgment. Next, she asks to reflect on what the image is trying to tell you. What is it trying to say? What does it need you to hear? And then finally, if it's distressed, like if the image is anxious or sad or worried, what do you think would make it feel a little bit better? I thought this was like a really beautiful container for an art practice that can increase the mindfulness within the process. I think this might be my favorite slide because I think it showcases some of the most interesting things that I've learned in my art therapy training. And so we spend a lot of time talking about materials and how material choice is so important for art therapy clients. And I thought that this would be actually very useful for you to use in your own practice. So art materials fall along a spectrum from very structured materials like pencils and markers and collage at one end, and then very unstructured or fluid materials on the other end. So that would look like paints or clay or oil pastels is a really good one. And the thing to be mindful of is to be really aware of what you need and what you need to effectively cope before you choose your materials. So for example, using structured materials might be really helpful for someone who's looking to gain a sense of control. It could be really helpful for people who suffer from really high anxiety or who have ADHD. It's also really great for people who are new to art making because it takes off some of the pressure from using materials that are a little bit more difficult to control and who can get more out of hand. So on the alternative end of the spectrum, we have our fluid materials. And these are really great if you need to tap into emotions, if you need to tap into something that's a little bit more unconscious. It's really helpful for people who are intellectualizers, so people who often get stuck in their head or who struggle with perfectionism. It can really help you engage in more messy, uncontrolled forms of art expression. So I have 5 different exercises to share with you today. They range from very simplistic to a little bit more engaging. And so I'm going to walk you through them all, and you can feel free to try these on your own time. I'll also at the end of the presentation include links to all of the sites or the therapists who have showcased these particular practices so that you can check them out on your own time. So this first one is called Meditative Drawing. And this one was a practice that I found through MoMA, so through the Museum of Modern Art. So the materials that you need are pretty limited. You just need 1 to 2 pieces of paper, 1 to 2 markers, and access to a live fish. So if you don't have a real fish, that's okay. You can look up videos of fish on your phone or on your computer. And if fish are not your thing, you can always just look at a tree outside your window if you have that available to you. What you need is just something that is nature-based, that moves. So the instructions is to really take a moment to observe the movements of the fish. The fish and the tree are really good options because the movements are usually pretty slow and pretty soothing. So as you begin to watch the movements, if you can not look down, that's great. But if not, you can look down as well. But record the movements on paper. So you can either spend your entire exercise just recording those movements. I think personally, I think that would be something that I would prefer. I think it would be very calming to do that. But this particular exercise also recommends to take it a little bit further. So once you've created an interesting shape based on the movements, you can use your other paper to create a composition by tracing it onto the second piece. As you can see on the right-hand side, there's an example of a shape that has been replicated into a composition that has been traced. And they've obviously reoriented the shape to a bunch of different orientations to create something that's interesting and catching to the eye. And then you can also take it one step further, just like they did in this image, and using some art-based materials, some different colors, you could add some color to the composition to make it more aesthetically pleasing. So that's our first exercise. The second exercise is self-directed or guided art appreciation. So I thought this was also another perfect one because you don't have to create anything. You just have to be present and have access to a piece of art. And it also goes back to some of the evidence that we talked about where you don't need to be a creator. Sometimes you just need to be able to have access to appreciate art. So the required amount of time for this exercise is 10 minutes. I think they picked this amount of time because it enables the person doing the activity to really slow down and tap into more of a mindful state. So the only material that you require is access to a piece of art. Obviously, once again, you can bring up art on your computer, or you can use art within a book, or if you have art in your home, you can do that as well. They recommend to pick an image that you find really peaceful and really calming. Because the last thing that you want to do in this calming exercise is to pick something that really conjures up some intense and negative emotions that kind of runs counter to what you hope to achieve. So pick something that is interesting to you. For whatever reason, it might be the colors or the light effect or the subject matter. Once you've found a comfortable space, really relax and immerse yourself into the image. So notice the colors that you are drawn to, notice the shapes, notice the lines, and then imagine yourself actually being in that place. Whether or not that's a peaceful place or a refreshing place, conjure up what it might be like to be there and really tap into all of your senses. So think about what sort of smells you might smell, what sort of gentle sounds might you hear, whatever is relevant to the image that you've chosen. So spending 10 minutes within that space, once you're ready to move on to something else, really take your time. So they recommend, really returning to your breathing, noticing your breath, noticing the room around you, maybe having a bit of a stretch before you go on with your day. One thing about the website that I got this activity from that's so lovely is that they actually have links to guided art appreciation videos. It's done by an art therapist who has like the most lovely English accent. So I checked one out the other day and it was actually really nice. So you don't even have to really do much except for listen and be mindful. It's a little bit more laid back than having to do it all yourself. So that could be something to check out. All right, this has to be my new favorite activity. So it's called Blackout Poetry. All you really need is a book or a magazine that you don't mind marking up or ripping pages out of, and one black marker. So it's a wonderful activity because it really involves limited materials, but also I think it takes a lot of pressure off for those who are intimidated by the creative process, because you're really not, you don't have the pressure of creating something from a blank slate. You are really just focusing on what stands out for you, what feels right for you on an emotional level. So the instructions are pretty simplistic. I would recommend, tearing out your page, especially if you're left-handed like me. It can be often hard to navigate with the marker if the middle of the book is in the way. So they ask you to just review the words on the page. Notice the ones that really stand out for you emotionally. You notice that the one in the image, they've even gone ahead and they've created boxes around it just so that they could keep track of them. So noticing the words that resonate with you. Once you've selected your words, you can go ahead and black out the rest of the page, leaving the ones that resonate with you exposed. And obviously, you can either just do a full out blackout of the page, or you could put a little bit of a creative spin on it, like in the image. So translating it into a more visual way. And if you're someone who likes to do scrapbooking, you can also cut out your blackout poetry and paste it into, a different background and engage, maybe put some art around it as a bit of a border. There's lots of things that you can do with it. All right. So the next one is woven mandala. So this one also requires some materials. It requires access to a paper plate or cardboard, cut in a circular shape, scissors, pen or pencil, and yarn. So most of these materials are pretty accessible to us. If you're having trouble with yarn, with COVID, it makes it a little bit more difficult, but there are also like other avenues like reuse centers, or sometimes Kijiji people are trying to get rid of art materials that way. And so I think that this is such a wonderful exercise because I think that there's something really special about fiber arts, something about engaging from a tactile perspective. There's something really soothing and comforting when you get to use soft materials. I also think that using an activity that involves repetitive and predictable technique can also be very soothing, because from a mental health background, having safety and security there is a lot of safety and security in repetition and simplicity. And so on this slide, I included very basic instructions to give you a high-level idea of what's involved. However, I would recommend, if this is something that you would like to try, to access the individual or the resource. You can see her image in the bottom right-hand corner. And on one of the slides, there'll be links to access her page, and you can actually watch a very thorough video that walks you through the entire process in a little bit more detail. All right, the last one that I shared is kind of more of a therapeutic technique, but I actually think that it can be really wonderful to do on your own at home. So it's a containing exercise. And the goal of the exercise is to create a place in which we can safely place distressing memories, thoughts, and feelings until we're ready to revisit them. So I want to be clear that this is not asking you to repress any of the feelings or thoughts or memories. Rather, the container is just supposed to be a temporary relief from distress until we feel like we are more resourced to work through the distress, whether it's on our own or whether it's in our therapy. It's a temporary safe place. So as with most activities, it's recommended to start this exercise through a grounding technique. You don't need very many materials. Once again, you just need a pencil and paper, and then a container of your choice and decorative materials should you choose to go that route. So once you've gone through your grounding exercise, take a moment to really design your container, sorry. So bring to mind what sort of barrier or container would safely hold some of the distressing memories, thoughts, and emotions that you have going on for you right now. So the purpose here is also not to punish our distress. So I would always encourage, to pick a container that is comfortable, that is a safe place where your distress can be, because we don't want to distress our distress. So once you've chosen your container, really explore the tactile qualities and tangible qualities of this object. So what would it feel like to the touch? How large or small is it? What is the temperature of the surface if you touch it? Is the material of the container really thick and strong, or is it very fragile and thin? Does the container need any extra supports outside of itself to keep it secure and safe? And so the final step, once you've gone through this imagination phase, is to gather what materials you have at your disposal and really try to recreate this container in 3D form. And then once you've created it, you can really engage with it as you see fit. So perhaps maybe you actually want to store some really painful memories in there. So maybe you would add photographs or mementos that connect to that memory that you can safely store there. Maybe if you're struggling with ruminating thoughts or worries or fears, maybe you want to write down on scrap pieces of paper what some of these thoughts and worries are. Or maybe you want to write them on paper and rip them up and then store them in this container. The options are limitless, and you can definitely play around with it how it feels right for you. So the individual, the therapist that what I was inspired from this creative activity from, she also provides a really wonderful guided script on her website. So if you find that the imagery process is a little bit too much pressure and you're not really sure like what questions to ask yourself, you can definitely refer to the script, and it really walks you through what questions to ask and kind of what things to be mindful of. And that can be a really nice support. All right, so as I mentioned, these are all the sources that I use for the activities that you've seen in this presentation. They're all really wonderful, and really, I would really recommend checking them out if you're interested in creating or adding to your practice. I especially liked Thirsty for Art because she just has like a ton of videos available on YouTube, and they really are just so calm and slow, and they really walk you through different art therapy practices. She also has a free resource on her website that gives you 7 different art-based self-care activities. So if you're looking just for like a little bit of a starter kit to get you started, this little kit will walk you through 7 different activities to try out at home. And she doesn't usually use too crazy of materials, so she typically uses things that you can easily find around your home. All right, so I wanted to share just a little bit about what art therapy is for those who are interested in learning a little bit more. So I took a definition from the Canadian Art Therapy Association and just translated it into a visual form. Their definition states that art therapy involves both the creative process and psychotherapy. So it's about facilitating self-exploration and understanding about the self using imagery, color, shape, and in order to elicit, thoughts and feelings. And so all of these integrate together to form the process of art therapy. And finally, if you are interested in seeking out an art therapist and doing your own art therapy work, CATA, the Canadian Art Therapy Association, also has a link to a directory on their website, so you can look up any art therapists in your area that are currently taking clients. All right, so thank you so much for listening to my talk today. I'm so happy that I got to share all of this information with you, and I'll hand it back over to Nicole.
Thanks a lot, Julie. Do you want to just close the screen share? What a wonderful presentation. My goodness.
Thank you.
Your slides were really beautiful. I felt it was inspiring just looking at your PowerPoint slides, and that's not a sentence I've ever said in my life. Really,
Thank
really
you.
beautiful. Yeah. And so I really appreciate so many handles on just sort of how to get started in a practical way, and as well as thinking about what is helpful about that.
Yeah.
So if you'd like to stick around and join us for a bit of conversation and questions, you're welcome to. If you're not able to, I just want to thank you for spending part of your Thursday evening with us. And just to remind you that we have a number of talks coming up. If you're interested in the arts and wellness, we happen to have another topic in that area in a couple of weeks around music and wellness. So you're welcome to join us for that one. And next week is self-care for helping professionals. So you're always welcome to join us. And thanks again for being here. For those of you sticking around, you can make comments in the chat or in the Q&A, and we will do our best to answer them. So Julie, someone asked early on in the presentation, and I would have maybe stopped you if I picked it up sooner, but it says, what was the name of the organization that the information was gathered from for research? Then I think it's the same person asking Anna Bodner. Was that?
Oh, okay. I think that they are asking about the Aboriginal Healing Foundation.
Okay.
Yeah, so they were established in the 90s and they did all of that research.
Okay, that makes sense. Good. And also, actually, I'll just say that the presentation slides as well as the video is going to be posted on the website, on the blog page. So if you want to catch the name of a title or a book or any of the resources, you'll be able to do that later as well. Someone's asking where you studied art therapy. That was Athabasca, but do you want to say a little bit more about the program, Julie?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm actually doing a joint program between Athabasca and the Vancouver Art Therapy Institute. So it's essentially a specialization in art therapy, but with a very heavy emphasis in counseling. So they're based out of Vancouver on Granville Island. And yeah, it's a very fascinating program.
Thank you. And a clarification on the question about the resource. Was it the Canadian Addictions Organizations? Oh, it's the Canadian Mental Health and Addiction, where you were tracking information about COVID and people.
Yes, that was the Canadian Centre for Addictions and Mental Health. They partnered with Delvinia, which is a research tech company, and all of their research is like their research platform is available free online. So you can actually sign up, log in, and access all of the data and filter it to what area you're in or area of expertise you're interested in.
Thank you. Comment early in the presentation was someone suggested if you draw clouds, there's no wrong way. And I really like that simple suggestion as someone who gets a bit myself intimidated when I'm asked to draw something. I always like to think also of things I can draw. Trees is usually my go-to. So thank you to this person for expanding my drawing repertoire.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah. So some comments of just thanking you for the information, and someone says they've really learned a lot and they're grateful to be here. Thank you for the inspiration. Someone said it can be daunting to think about creating art, but these
Mm.
are really great exercises and good starting points. So,
Oh, good.
Thank you for a very articulate and fascinating presentation, Julie. Particularly interested in the self-directed guided art appreciation idea. Would be great and accessible meditation practice.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Well, here's a question. I think this is probably a therapist or someone working in the helping profession. Are we allowed to utilize art therapy techniques with clients without being certified as an art therapist?
Oh, that is such a
Big
tricky question. I think that it's like, I think that what I have learned, because I've asked this question myself, is that there's always space for art within the therapeutic space. I think, to use a specific technique, I would always encourage practitioners to have training, especially because art therapy really teaches you how to engage very spontaneously in the practice of art therapy. So it's very similar to counseling in that it's not just about doing strategies or asking questions. It's about like everything that surrounds that. Yeah, so I don't know if that answered your question or if I just made it more convoluted, but that's kind of where I'm at.
I'll add for a therapist who might be local as well that St. Stephen's College in Edmonton also has an art therapy degree stream, but they also have a certificate, like an after certificate for people who are therapists. So you could take all of those courses for the certificate, but also a lot of therapists might take, some of the courses as a way of exploring or seeing if you want to expand your scope and your competence in that area too. So someone is asking, do color choices reveal anything about how a person is feeling?
Oh, that is an interesting question. And there are two things that I want to say about that question. And the first is that there's a lot of research and literature that points to the fact that color definitely impacts our mood and how we're feeling. However, when it comes to the colors used by clients or by people in their art, we're not necessarily encouraged to interpret that. And there are different camps. There are obviously some therapists that would disagree with that and do a lot of interpretation. But I think it's an opportunity to really find out from the client what that color means. I try not to make any assumptions that blue means sad or red means mad. But obviously there are different perspectives, but that's just mine.
Thank you. Someone's saying you mentioned the person that was influencing you in learning art therapy. Who was this?
I think that was a reference to one of the art therapists' work that I had referenced for this presentation. Her, or I guess like her screen name is called Thirsty for Art. Her link to her page is listed on one of the sources on one of the slides. So you can definitely look into her. Has so much information out there to get you started. Yeah, she's really fantastic.
I imagine Kata's website is probably a great resource for people looking for more information about art therapy.
Yeah.
In particular, I see a couple of additional questions about using art therapy versus calling yourself an art therapist. So I think their website would be a good resource for that. And also, you're welcome to email Julie for more specific questions about that. Yeah,
absolutely.
Okay, a few more questions about that too. So yeah, I'll definitely invite those questions to Julie in particular, just more in terms about the pathways to using art therapy and integrating it in practice, and as well as that certification, since she's just in the midst of it.
Sure.
Yeah. I really appreciated your, a couple of slides you had at the beginning of just talking about the different ways that art and the art process can be healing and differentiating that from art therapy. And there's lots of facets of it. So lots of questions.
I feel like I just barely scraped the surface of what I could have talked about. And I'm sure that you could spend several webinars really digging deep in each of those pieces. Yeah.
Sounds good. And you, one more question I was about to. Oh, any guidance on creating collages? Oh, what a great question.
That is a good question. I don't have a ton of experience myself doing collage work, but I know that that can be a really useful tool, especially in therapy. Just like really spending time kind of noticing which sort of images that you're drawn to and doing some introspection in terms of why do you think that you're drawn to those images and what are those images, wanting to communicate with you. In terms of specific collage work, and practices, I don't have any off the top of my head, but if you email me, I can certainly do some research and share some with you.
A therapist who's with a student, actually, also who was with River's Edge a number of years ago, did a few workshops for clients. And I'm trying to think, Soul Collage was the name of the process that she used. And I think there's a Soul Collage website that kind of goes through a specific process. So that was really meaningful, and very much like you said, Julie, a lot of it was, very mindfulness based in terms of just noticing, your reactions to different pieces, and people would be quite surprised. Soul, like SOUL, just answering the question there, collage. Yeah. I see those workshops kind of advertised now and again, even recently. So, yeah. I hope it's okay to say it, but I think, Julie, you're thinking about an art therapy group as well coming up.
Yeah, absolutely.
Make sure that that's still happening. And I know you're ironing out the details, but and because that's with one of our students, like our grief group and our we also did a mom and taught group this year, and a number of groups that we're offering for no charge in COVID. That will be the case for the workshop that Julie does as well. It will be a gift from her to our community. So if anyone's interested in something a little bit more experiential, that's an option as well. And that will be online. Yes. So the pleasure of figuring out how to facilitate an art therapy group online, which is pretty cool. Yeah. Being able to do that.
It should be fun.
People responding positively to that. So I'm glad I remembered to
thank you.
The opportunity to do that. Good. Well, I think that comes to the end of our questions. We're just about the top of the hour. You are welcome to catch the recording and the slides, as I said, on our page. I hope that we will see you at a future webinar. And until then, thanks again for being here, and I wish you all well. Take care.
Take care, everyone.